In the middle of rural Arizona, a young woman made a decision that would change her life forever. She took in a creature most would run from, a wild bobcat kitten, orphaned and on the verge of death. Everyone warned her, "It's dangerous, unpredictable, it'll turn on you." But she didn't listen. 7 years later, on one dark winter night, that same bobcat would make a choice no one could have predicted. A choice that would save her life and leave even hardened emergency responders in tears. What could drive a wild predator to protect a human? This story will change how you see loyalty forever. Sometimes the wild doesn't come for a fight. It comes looking for mercy. The harsh desert storm. The Arizona sky churned with rage that summer evening, a furious wall of thunderclouds boiling over the vast, red canyons of Prescott National Forest. Rain pounded the rust-colored dirt in violent sheets, turning the winding mountain road to mud as lightning split the sky with furious cracks. It was the kind of storm locals called a desert tantrum, brutal, sudden, and always dangerous. Jessica Lane stood on the porch of her off-grid log cabin, arms wrapped tightly around herself as the wind whipped through the pines. Her nearest neighbor was 7 miles away, and the only road leading in or out of the canyon had been flooded out just hours ago. But she didn't mind. She had chosen this life, solitude, silence, the steady rhythm of nature untamed. She turned to go back inside when something, a sound, faint and unfamiliar, cut through the howl of the wind. A cry. It was thin, high-pitched, and carried a rawness that pierced the roar of the rain. Jessica froze, her ears straining. Another cry came. Closer this time. It wasn't human. It wasn't a fox or coyote either. It was something smaller. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped off the porch, boots sinking slightly into the rain-soaked earth. The beam cut through the dark as she scanned the bushes lining the edge of the forest. Then she saw it. Curled beneath a bent juniper branch, soaked and shivering, was a tiny creature barely the size of a house cat. Its fur was matted and slick with mud, its paws trembling violently as it tried to crawl out of the wet undergrowth. Tufts of frost-tipped ear hair twitched in fear, and deep blue eyes, wild, panicked, and impossibly young, locked onto hers. Jessica's breath caught. "A bobcat kitten," she whispered. It couldn't have been more than 5 weeks old, its gray-brown coat speckled with black rosettes, its body barely holding up its own weight. Blood clung to a scratch along its hind leg. Alone, injured, and with no mother in sight, it wouldn't survive the night. Not in this storm. Not out here. Jessica's heart thudded. Logic screamed to leave it be, that nature would take its course. But something in her, a quiet voice she always listened to, urged her forward. Slowly, gently, she crouched. "It's okay, little one," she said softly, holding out her hand. "I've got you now." And with that, a decision was made, one that would change both their lives forever. You don't choose the wild. Sometimes the wild chooses you. Enter Jessica Lane, the rescuer. Jessica Lane had always been different. At 29, she wasn't what most people expected from someone who lived alone in the remote hills near Thumb Butte, Arizona. She had once been a rising star in a big city wildlife photography firm, traveling from the Everglades to Yellowstone, always chasing that one perfect shot. But 5 years ago, something had broken inside her. A bad relationship, a worse betrayal, and a life that no longer felt like her own. So she left it all behind. These days, Jessica's world was one of pine needles and sunrise mist, adobe-colored rocks and the hush of nature. Her cabin, built with her own hands from repurposed timber, sat on 3 acres of untouched land, nestled between the towering ponderosa pines. With a camera, a solar setup, and an old Ford truck she barely used, Jessica found peace in the stillness the world had forgotten. And now, cradled in her arms, was the very symbol of that wild life. A bobcat kitten. Wrapped in a faded fleece blanket, the kitten barely stirred as Jessica stepped into the warmth of her home. The storm howled behind her, but inside, it was quiet save for the crackling of the fire and the rhythmic tick of the antique wall clock. She knelt on the hardwood floor, laying the kitten down gently near the fireplace. With hands practiced from years of photographing wildlife, she moved slowly, methodically, drying its damp fur, checking the wound on its leg, whispering calm nothings as its tiny chest rose and fell. The kitten opened its eyes, wide, uncertain, but not afraid. Jessica felt it in that moment, deep and instinctual. The animal had chosen her. She should have called a wildlife rehab center right then. But the roads were closed. Cell service was gone. And even if it wasn't, something about the way the bobcat leaned into her palm, a purr barely audible, made her hesitate. She fed it goat's milk with a dropper, improvised a soft nest in a wooden crate, and sat beside it, long into the night. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, two survivors, one human, one wild, found a fragile beginning of trust. And though Jessica didn't know it yet, this tiny bundle of fur would one day repay her in a way no one could imagine. Real trust isn't built in moments of peace. It's built when survival depends on it. The first weeks, survival and bonding. The storm passed by dawn, but the world it left behind felt still and raw, like the earth itself was catching its breath. Jessica woke on the living room floor, back stiff from sleeping near the crate, a blanket draped around her shoulders. The little bobcat lay curled in the fleece, nestled deep into the folds like it had always belonged there. It hadn't moved much through the night, but now, its tiny ears perked up at the sound of her stirring. She reached in slowly and held out a finger. It licked her fingertip. Jessica exhaled, tension she hadn't realized she'd held flooding out of her. That morning marked the beginning of a fragile, day-by-day journey, one filled with improvisation, small victories, and quiet doubt. She named him Aspen, after the trees lining the edge of her land, whose silvery leaves whispered even when the wind stood still. He was no house pet. That became clear quickly. He refused the kitten chow she bought at the local feed store. Instead, she pureed cooked chicken breast and goat's milk, offering it in a shallow ceramic dish. He hissed at sudden sounds, pounced on shadows, and had a habit of climbing her flannel shirts like they were tree trunks. But between the wildness, something softer began to emerge. Each morning, he greeted her with a chirping mewl, paws stretching against the crate's edges. Each night, he curled near the fireplace, eyes half-lidded as she read aloud from old paperback novels. There were moments when she wondered what she was doing, raising a predator in her cabin, miles from the nearest vet, with no plan, no precedent. Aspen's instincts were sharp. His claws drew blood when he got startled. One night, he leapt after a moth and shattered the oil lamp beside the bookshelf. Jessica swept up the glass in silence, Aspen watching her from the corner, his tail flicking nervously. But she never raised her voice. She didn't cage him. And that, she realized, was what made all the difference. By the end of the first week, Aspen followed her from room to room. By the second, he climbed into her lap and fell asleep to the sound of her heartbeat. He didn't purr often, but when he did, it was deep, resonant, like the purr of something ancient remembering warmth for the first time. Neighbors didn't know. The few who visited assumed she was fostering a rescue kitten. She didn't correct them. Out here, people minded their business. But inside her cabin, a bond was forming, one written not in commands or obedience, but in eye contact, stillness, and presence. Jessica didn't know what came next. She only knew this wild thing had chosen her. And she had chosen him right back, Every wild heart comes with a choice: let it go or love it anyway. Growth and conflict. By the third month, Aspen no longer fit in the crate. He had doubled in size, nearly 15 inches tall at the shoulder, lean and long-limbed with muscle beneath his soft spotted coat. His once round kitten face had sharpened, revealing the proud structure of a wildcat. Tall, pointed ears with tufted black tips, a square jaw, and amber eyes that missed nothing. Jessica couldn't deny it any longer. He wasn't a kitten anymore. He was a bobcat, a real one. And she was raising him in her living room. It wasn't the plan. It never had been. She told herself she would let him go, once he was strong enough, once the leg healed, once the storms passed. But now it was spring, and Aspen was still here. And so were the questions. Her closest friend, Dana, a veterinarian down in Prescott Valley, paid her a visit one Sunday afternoon. The two women sipped lemonade on the porch, while Aspen watched silently from behind the screen door. "He's beautiful," Dana said, eyes following the bobcat's graceful movement. "But Jess, you're playing a dangerous game." Jessica didn't flinch. "I know." "No, I don't think you do." Dana set her drink down. "You're training him without meaning to. He's imprinting on you, and when he's fully grown, his instincts won't just vanish." Jessica looked away, jaw tightening. "I can't just release him, not now. He's not ready. And no sanctuary will take a semi-socialized bobcat. They'll put him down." Dana sighed. "Then be prepared. Because when he hits full maturity, that bond you think you have, it might not mean what you hope it means." Jessica didn't respond. She just watched Aspen through the screen, how he moved like wind through tall grass, light on his feet, silent as shadow. There was no aggression in him, but she could feel it, just under the surface. A tension, a line that couldn't be crossed. The trouble began 2 weeks later. A neighbor's dog wandered onto her land, an old retriever named Max. Jessica had barely opened the door when Aspen froze, back arched, growling low in his throat. Before she could react, he launched forward in a blur. Jessica dove between them, shouting Aspen's name with more force than she ever had, and he stopped. Mid-pounce, claws bared, he froze. His eyes met hers, and something in them changed. Recognition, guilt, fear. Aspen backed away, slowly, retreating into the cabin like a ghost. That night, Jessica sat by the fire, her hands trembling as she stroked his fur. He leaned into her, silent. She knew what Dana had meant now. Loving a wild thing came with risk. But she also knew this. Aspen had listened. And that had to mean something. Some bonds aren't trained. They're earned, day by day, in silence and trust. An unbreakable bond. 7 years passed like a soft wind through pine needles, quiet, steady, and full of change. Aspen was no longer the fragile kitten Jessica had cradled beside the fire. He had become a full-grown bobcat, nearly 30 pounds of pure muscle and grace. His paws were broad and silent as snowfall. His shoulders rolled with the power of a predator, and his presence filled every room he walked into. And yet, he had never once turned on her. Their rhythm was unspoken. Jessica would rise at dawn, brew her strong black coffee, and open the front door. Aspen would already be there on the porch, watching the woods as if he were guarding a kingdom only he could see. She'd sit beside him, camera slung over her shoulder, waiting for the light to hit the trees just right. Sometimes he followed her deep into the forest, moving a few yards ahead, tail flicking in response to every bird call or snapping twig. Other times, he disappeared for hours, only to return with a drop of blood at the corner of his mouth and a soft grunt, then collapse in front of the fireplace like a house cat with secrets. Jessica had photographed mountain lions, foxes, and golden eagles in the wild, but nothing compared to the moments Aspen allowed her to capture. A wild bobcat nuzzling a human's palm, lounging beside her boots as she typed up reports, stretching out on sun-drenched rocks while birds fluttered overhead. Her photos became internet famous. Nature magazines reached out. A publisher called. She declined most of it, not because she didn't want the world to see, but because Aspen wasn't a spectacle. He was family. She built him an outdoor enclosure the size of a one-car garage, covered in reinforced mesh and surrounded by logs and rocks. The gate was always open. He never tried to leave. Jessica no longer questioned the decision she'd made all those years ago. She just accepted it. Their lives were entwined. He was a sentinel, not a pet. A companion, not a captive. Sometimes at night, when the coyotes howled from the ridge and the wind turned cold, Aspen would climb onto her bed, curl at her feet, and stare at the door until morning. And sometimes Jessica would wake to find his golden eyes watching her in the dark. Not with hunger or fear, but something older, something deeper. Like loyalty, like love. No one else would ever understand it, but they didn't need to. Because Aspen knew, and Jessica trusted him with her life. The wild knows long before the human heart is ready to listen. A warning from the wild. It started with a growl, not loud, not threatening, just a low, rumbling vibration from Aspen's chest as he stared through the sliding glass door, unmoving, eyes fixed on the woods beyond the clearing. Jessica glanced up from her laptop, where she'd been editing photos from last week's hike along the Granite Creek Trail. The glow of the fireplace flickered behind her, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the late autumn wind swept through the trees, rustling dry leaves into small twisters across the dirt path. "Aspen?" she asked softly. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. She followed his gaze out into the night, but saw nothing. It wasn't unusual for Aspen to be alert. He'd always had a sixth sense for movement in the woods, deer, rabbits, the occasional fox. But this was different. His body was stiff. His ears weren't twitching in curiosity. They were pinned back in something closer to alarm. Jessica stood slowly, setting her mug down on the coffee table. That's when he growled again, louder this time, sharp and urgent. He stepped between her and the door. That stopped her cold. In 7 years, Aspen had never positioned himself between her and an exit. Never postured like this. It wasn't aggression. It was warning. Something was out there. She turned off the lights, letting her eyes adjust to the dark. The moon was only a sliver, casting just enough silver light to make out shapes in the trees. She opened the door an inch, and cold air rushed in, along with something else. A sound, a twig snapping, then another, too slow, too deliberate for an animal. Jessica's breath caught. She backed away, heart pounding. Aspen stayed planted by the door, shoulders tense, his body low to the ground. He let out a sharp, short, bark-like snarl, a sound she'd never heard from him before. That's when she locked the door and pulled the heavy curtain closed. Still, Aspen didn't move from his post. He stayed there all night. Jessica didn't sleep. Not really. She sat in the dark with a flashlight and the old .38 revolver her father had given her after a break-in years ago, her ears tuned to every creak of the cabin walls. No further sounds came, but Aspen didn't relax. Not even when the sun rose over the ridge and painted the pine trees gold. He sat there like a statue, unmoving, watching, guarding. Jessica didn't know what he sensed, or who, but she knew this. Whatever it was, Aspen had felt it first, and whatever was coming. He would not let it near her. Danger doesn't always come with claws. Sometimes it wears a human face. The break-in. The snow came early that year. By mid-November, the forest surrounding Jessica's cabin was blanketed in white, muffling the sounds of the world like a thick wool coat. The road leading in and out had become nearly impassable, and the nearest cell tower had gone dark after a windstorm the week before. Jessica didn't mind the isolation. She thrived in it. But Aspen did not sleep. For 3 nights straight, he stood watch by the window, eyes narrowed toward the darkened tree line. He paced more, ate less. His movements were tight, deliberate, like a predator hunting something he couldn't see, but could sense just beneath the surface of the world. Jessica had started to feel it too, a heaviness in the air, a pressure that pressed against the windows, curled beneath the floorboards. Then came the 4th night. She had just finished washing dishes, hands still damp from the sink, when she heard it. The sound of boots, heavy ones, crunching slowly across the snow outside. Her heart froze. She turned off the kitchen light instinctively, her body moving before her mind caught up. Aspen was already at the door, a low snarl rising from his chest like distant thunder. A shadow passed the frosted glass of the back door. Someone was out there. Jessica grabbed the revolver from the drawer beneath the coffee mugs. Her hands shook, not from the cold, but from the kind of fear that made the body remember things it hadn't yet lived through. Then the doorknob turned. It didn't rattle. It twisted slowly, like someone testing it. Not to break in, but to slip in unnoticed. Jessica stepped back, holding the gun in both hands, breath shallow. Aspen growled louder now, standing in front of her like a wall of muscle and instinct. The lock clicked. Jessica screamed, "Get out!" At the exact moment the door burst open. A man in a ski mask shoved his way inside, taller than she expected, gloved hands reaching for her with terrifying speed. But he never made it to her. Aspen launched. It wasn't a bark or a bluff or a warning. It was pure protection. The bobcat exploded into motion, teeth bared, claws flashing. He hit the intruder with such force that the man stumbled back, crashing into the wall, knocking over the coat rack and sending snow flying across the wooden floor. The man screamed, more shocked than hurt, and bolted. Aspen chased him out the door, down the steps, into the night. Jessica ran after them to the edge of the porch, just in time to see the man vanish into the tree line, Aspen still on his heels. Then, suddenly silence. Only the sound of her own breath in the snow-heavy air, and the echo of what might have been her final moment, if not for Aspen. In the moment when fear wins over reason, it's instinct that saves you. Aspen's instinct. The snow absorbed the sound of Aspen's pursuit so thoroughly that Jessica stood frozen, ears straining, heart slamming in her chest, but hearing nothing, no snarls, no shouts, not even footsteps, just wind. Then, from somewhere deep in the trees, a sharp yelp, human. Followed by silence. Jessica's legs moved before her brain caught up. She yanked on her boots, didn't bother with a coat, and sprinted down the porch steps, the revolver heavy in her hand. Her breath puffed out in frantic clouds as she plunged into the woods, flashlight beam cutting wildly through the dark. "Aspen!" she called. No answer. She pushed forward, crashing through the snowdrifts, branches tearing at her sleeves. The ground was uneven, cold, biting through to her skin. But none of that registered. All she could see was Aspen, bleeding, alone, hurt. Then her flashlight caught movement. Aspen stood still as stone at the edge of a dry creek bed, his shoulders hunched, his breath visible in thick clouds. Just beyond him lay a shape, sprawled in the snow, groaning. The intruder. He was moaning, one leg twisted beneath him at a grotesque angle, mask torn, blood dripping from a gash across his temple. Aspen stood over him, hackles raised, tail flicking in tight, angry arcs. But he didn't attack again. He just waited. Jessica stepped closer, revolver raised. The man looked up, face pale, eyes wide with something far more than pain. Fear. She didn't recognize him. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark beard under the torn mask, soaked jeans, and a hunting knife still strapped to his thigh. "You move," she said, voice steel, "and I won't stop him next time." The man's mouth opened, maybe to plead, but no words came. Jessica pulled out her phone instinctively, forgetting for a moment there was no service. Then she remembered the emergency radio in the shed. She needed backup. Law enforcement. Someone to take this man away before he decided to try again. Aspen turned to her, finally stepping away from the man, circling back to her side. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around him. His fur was warm, his chest heaving. One of his front paws bled lightly, but his eyes were steady, watchful, alert. "Good boy," she whispered into his neck, voice trembling. "You came back." He licked her cheek once, then turned again to stand guard beside the intruder. Jessica stood and began to back away, keeping her eyes on the man, hands steady on the gun. She didn't know how far he'd planned to go. She didn't know if she would have survived that night. But Aspen had known something was coming. And because of that, she was still alive. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they walk on four paws with silent courage. Emergency responders' reactions. The wail of sirens cut through the morning stillness, flashing red and blue across the snow-covered pines, as the sheriff's SUV and two paramedic trucks tore up the icy back road toward Jessica's cabin. The emergency call had come through a ranger station relayed by her battery-powered ham radio just after dawn. She kept her voice calm during the transmission, but the dispatcher could hear the underlying tremor. When officers arrived, they found Jessica standing in the center of the clearing, revolver still in her hand. The intruder sat slumped against a tree, both hands zip-tied behind his back, face bloodied, leg visibly broken. And standing between them, calm, silent, unflinching, was a bobcat. At first, the deputies didn't believe what they were seeing. "You said a cat stopped him?" one officer asked, disbelief coloring his tone. Jessica nodded, her voice tight. "Not a cat, a bobcat. His name's Aspen." The paramedics began assessing the man's injuries, while the deputies asked Jessica to recount the events. As she spoke, Aspen remained close by, pacing in a wide arc, watching every stranger with narrowed eyes. When one of the medics got too close, he let out a soft growl. "He's not attacking," Jessica said quickly. "He's protecting." The sheriff himself, a grizzled man with 30 years on the job, crouched to Aspen's level. He didn't reach out, didn't try to touch him, just looked. "I've seen dogs defend their people," he muttered. "But this is something else." They called animal control as a protocol, but Jessica refused to let Aspen be taken. With a steady voice and shaking hands, she made it clear. Aspen had saved her life. And now she would protect his with everything she had. The wild doesn't speak our language until it speaks louder than any human ever could. The news breaks. Word spread faster than wildfire. By the next afternoon, a local Prescott reporter caught wind of the story from the sheriff's office and drove straight to Jessica's cabin. He wasn't expecting to find a real bobcat lounging by the fireplace like a seasoned guard dog, but he did. And when Jessica agreed to share her story on record, the world listened. "Woman saved by her pet bobcat." During break-in was the headline. Within 24 hours, the story had gone viral. Major networks picked it up. ABC, CNN, even international outlets. Animal behaviorists were interviewed. Wildlife authorities weighed in. Half the world called Jessica a hero. The other half called her irresponsible. And all the while, Aspen stayed close, utterly indifferent to the attention. That week, Jessica received dozens of messages from strangers, conservationists, law students, even children who wrote, "Your cat is braver than any superhero." But not everyone was cheering. Arizona Wildlife Services contacted her with a warning. According to state law, keeping a bobcat without proper permits was illegal. They requested she surrender Aspen to a wildlife facility. Jessica refused. She hired a lawyer, compiled 7 years' worth of photos, vet records, and behavioral assessments. A petition was launched. Tens of thousands signed in support. The sheriff himself offered a statement. That animal prevented a tragedy. That should count for something. After 2 months of mounting public pressure and legal review, the state relented. Jessica was granted a rare, lifetime exemption to keep Aspen under a new classification, wild companion animal for personal protection and emotional care. No one had ever earned that status before. But then again, no one had ever had a guardian like Aspen. Some heroes don't fall in battle. They fade in silence, leaving behind a legacy that echoes forever. Aspen's decline. 2 years passed after the break-in, but something in Aspen changed. At first, it was subtle. He slept more, wandered less. His sharp, alert movements grew slower, and the sparkle in his golden eyes dulled, just a little. Jessica chalked it up to age. He was nearly 10 now, and wildcats didn't live forever. But a whisper of worry tugged at her. Then, one morning, she noticed a limp. It was his right front leg, the same one he'd used to launch himself at the intruder. She examined it gently, finding no visible wound. But when he walked, he staggered slightly, favoring the limb with a stiffness that hadn't been there before. Jessica called Dana, her veterinarian friend, and drove Aspen down to her private practice in Prescott, in a crate built into the back of her truck. Dana ran tests, blood work, x-rays, ultrasounds. When the results came in, she didn't sugarcoat it. "There's old internal damage," she said softly, laying the x-rays on the lightboard. "Likely from the night of the attack. A rib that healed wrong, signs of minor organ bruising. And now, arthritis is setting in. Fast." Jessica stared at the images, her heart sinking. "He never complained," she whispered. "Of course he didn't," Dana replied. "He was protecting you, that night, and every day since." There was no cure, only comfort. Jessica brought Aspen home and changed everything for him. Soft ramps replaced steps. A heated bed was placed near the fire. She cooked his food from scratch, sat beside him every night, and whispered stories into his fur. He didn't play like before, but he stayed close, always watching her with those same steady eyes, still guarding her, even as his strength slipped away. We don't always get to say thank you, but sometimes life gives us one last quiet chance. Final goodbye. Spring returned to the mountains in a slow, golden bloom. Snow melted into streams that whispered through the canyons, and the air filled with the scent of pine and wet earth. Aspen, now slower and quieter than ever, spent his days lying on the sun-warmed deck, eyes half closed, ears twitching to the rhythm of the forest he knew by heart. Jessica knew the time was near. His appetite faded. He no longer rose when she stepped outside, though his eyes always followed her. And then one morning, she found him curled beneath the juniper tree near the edge of the property, the very tree he'd once chased birds around as a kitten. He didn't lift his head. She sat down beside him in the damp grass, cradling his body gently in her arms. His breathing was shallow but peaceful. "I remember the night I found you," she whispered, stroking his fur. "You were the size of my forearm, all ears and eyes in fear. And you chose me. You chose to trust me." The breeze rustled through the leaves above them. "I never deserved that kind of faith, Aspen, but you gave it every single day." Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't look away. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Aspen let out a soft breath, a final exhale, and then stillness. No tension, no pain, only peace. Jessica buried him beneath the juniper, wrapping his body in the same fleece blanket she'd used the night she brought him in from the storm. She placed a flat river stone above his grave, carved with one word: loyal. And, as the sun dipped low beyond the ridge, she sat beside him one last time, hand pressed to the earth, heart full of gratitude and grief. When love leaves, it leaves something behind, something worth carrying forward. A new purpose. The cabin felt impossibly quiet after Aspen was gone. The silence wasn't just the absence of his steps or the weight of his body curling by the fire. It was deeper, an emptiness that stretched into the spaces between each breath Jessica took. For weeks, she wandered her property in silence, pausing beneath the juniper tree each morning, hand brushing the stone that marked his grave. She knew grief, but this was something else. It was a calling. One evening, as she scrolled through old photos, some of Aspen as a kitten tucked into her hoodie, others of him prowling the forest like a king, an idea began to take shape. Something purposeful, something that honored the bond they had shared and the second chance she'd been given. Within 2 months, Jessica had filed paperwork, spoken to wildlife biologists, and reached out to conservation networks. And by summer, it was official. The Wild Bond Foundation was born. Headquartered on her own land, the nonprofit focused on rehabilitating orphaned or injured wildlife, especially predators like bobcats, foxes, and coyotes, creatures often misunderstood, feared, or euthanized. Jessica turned her outbuilding into a fully equipped care center. With the help of volunteers and local vets, she began taking in animals that might have once been cast aside. She didn't tame them. That wasn't the point. She helped them heal, gain strength, and, when possible, return to the wild where they belonged. People began visiting: school children, nature lovers, even researchers. And when they asked why she started it all, Jessica would always say the same thing: because one wild soul saved my life. Now, I help others find theirs. And every time she said it, she felt Aspen there, still watching, still guarding her in his own way. Some stories refuse to stay silent. They demand to be shared so they can keep saving lives. A book and a film deal. The letters started arriving one after another. Emails, handwritten notes, phone calls from strangers who had seen the news story, followed the foundation, or heard whispers of the woman in Arizona and her bobcat protector. A literary agent from Los Angeles reached out first. "I don't usually chase stories," she wrote, "but this one won't let me sleep." Jessica hesitated. She wasn't a writer, not really. But as she sifted through old journals, photo logs, and letters she had written to Aspen after he passed, something clicked. The memories poured out in scenes and scents. Rain against the cabin roof, the weight of a tiny paw on her arm, the night she almost lost her life, and how he'd given it back to her. Within 6 months, the manuscript was finished. She called it Aspen, the Bobcat Who Watched Over Me. The book debuted modestly, but word spread quickly. Reviews called it hauntingly beautiful, and a rare story of raw wilderness and even rarer devotion. It hit bestseller lists, and soon a documentary team came calling. Jessica agreed, on one condition: no actors, no fabrications. You use my footage. His real face, his real story. The crew followed her through the forests he once prowled, filmed the animals now healing in her sanctuary, and used Jessica's own video library, clips from her wildlife cameras. Candid moments of Aspen, lounging in sunlit silence, leaping through the snow, guarding the porch. When the film premiered, the final frame lingered on a close-up of Aspen's eyes. Steady, unblinking, wild. The screen faded to black, and in packed theaters people wept. Because this wasn't just a story about a woman and her bobcat. It was a story about what love looks like when it has claws and still chooses to protect. What Aspen and Jessica shared wasn't just a rare connection. It was a reminder that love, trust, and protection can come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes, the bond that saves us doesn't wear a uniform or speak our language. It growls when danger nears. It watches in silence. It stays. Aspen taught us that loyalty isn't about obedience, it's about presence. It's about showing up, standing guard, and choosing someone. Again and again, even when you don't have to. In our lives, we may never raise a wild bobcat, but we all carry within us the ability to protect, to nurture, and to be someone's shelter in the storm. At Paw Prints and Stories, we believe every creature, no matter how small, broken, or wild, has the power to leave a lasting mark on a human heart. If this story moved you, then maybe it chose you too. Maybe you're meant to carry it forward. So here's our challenge to you. Find your Aspen. Whether it's a stray dog, a broken friendship, or even a part of yourself you've abandoned, bring it in from the storm. Guard it, grow with it, and let it change you.